The mockery begins. The chains around Rayan's wrists were tighter than necessary, but he didn't complain. He stood silently in the center of a massive hall floor, smooth like black glass, walls shimmering with moving lights, and dozens of alien eyes staring at him with open disgust. At the far end sat 3 thrones, and on those thrones sat the daughters of the alien king. The 3 royal sisters. Sivara, the eldest, leaned forward with her sharp silver eyes focused on him like he was something rotten. Her skin was pale purple, smooth and regal, and her long white braids hung like frozen ropes. She spoke first. Is it human, this soft, pink little thing? Beside her, Janari laughed. Her voice was bitter and mocking. He looks like a lost animal. Do you think he even understands what we're saying? Rayan stayed silent. Tula, the youngest sister, didn't laugh, but her lip curled slightly. She tilted her head. He doesn't even smell intelligent, she said, her tone somewhere between curious and cruel. Their words echoed around the chamber. Alien nobles and guards smirked, whispered, chuckled. Rayan was just a creature to them, not a soldier, not a man, just a primitive being from a long-forgotten world that the galaxy had abandoned. He didn't flinch, he didn't speak, he simply observed. The throne room was a weapon in itself. Every movement, every glance, was a reminder of their power and his helplessness. Savara stood, walking down the steps slowly, deliberately. What are you, human? She asked, circling him like a predator, a spy, a scavenger, a fool who wandered too far into real space. I'm none of those, Rayan finally said. His voice was calm, deep, and clear. I'm just alive. And that seems to bother you. For a second, the room went silent. That Na'ar, I blinked. Alive. You're barely standing. You were found unconscious in a broken ship, floating near the cursed zones of Chorus Prime. Do you even know where you are? I do now, Rayan said, locking eyes with her. Tula rose from her throne. Unlike her sisters, her steps were softer, more graceful. She approached him, stopping only inches away. Her alien pupils narrowed, scanning his face. You're not afraid, she whispered. I don't fear people who rely on chains to feel powerful. A sharp gasp ran through the nobles. Even the guards shifted. No one ever spoke to the sisters like that. Sivara's hand glowed with faint blue energy. Perhaps we should remind him who stands before him. But before she could act, a cold, deep voice echoed through the hall. That will not be necessary. The entire room turned. A hidden door at the top of the throne dais opened. From it stepped the king. He was taller than all, draped in black robes with silver patterns that moved like water. His face was marked with lines of age and war, his eyes glowing with old wisdom. The sisters quickly returned to their places. Everyone bowed except Rayan, who didn't know the custom and didn't care to. The king walked slowly down the steps, his eyes never leaving the human. You did not kneel. I wasn't told to, Rayan replied. A pause. Then the king chuckled. Brave or foolish? Sometimes they're the same thing, Rayan said. The king now stood before him, taller than him, stronger looking, and absolutely alien, but still somehow familiar. You are Rayan, the king said. One of the last humans still roaming the stars. That's what I've heard. Then, listen carefully, the king said, his voice shifting from amused to serious. I've seen war, I've seen empires rise and fall, and I've seen your kind survive things that should have destroyed you. The sisters frowned. This wasn't going how they expected. I've also seen arrogance, the king said, turning slightly toward his daughters, and pride that blinds even the strongest bloodlines. Savara narrowed her eyes. Father, silence. The word hit the room like thunder. The king turned back to Rayan. You are here for a reason. This is not a coincidence. The old texts speak of a human, a last member who will reignite what we've lost. I don't believe in prophecies, Rayan said. Neither did I, the king replied, until I saw you. He looked up at his daughters. You 3 have mocked this man. You laughed at his flesh, his size, his silence, but I see what none of you do. He raised his hand. By royal decree, you will marry him. The room froze. What? Savara shouted. You cannot be serious, Janari hissed. Tula simply stared, her lips parted in silent disbelief. The king didn't blink. You will marry the human, all 3 of you. The bond will be formalized through the ancient rites. It is not a punishment. It is the beginning of our survival. Rayan's mind spun. This was not what he expected. Not at all. I never agreed to this, he said. You will, the king said, because you want to live. and because you're stronger than all of them combined." And with that the king turned and left, his robes trailing behind like shadowy smoke. Rayan stood still. The chains were gone, but now he was trapped in something far more dangerous. 3 alien sisters, a prophecy he didn't understand, and a marriage he never asked for. The king's will silence filled the royal chamber long after the king had left. The alien sisters stood frozen, their minds still trying to process the royal command. The nobles were gone, the guards had been dismissed, and only Rayan remained with the 3 daughters of the empire. Each one of them stared at him differently now, not with mockery, but with burning confusion and anger. Savara was the first to speak, her voice low and deadly. "This must be a test," she said. "Father is pushing us to some limit, but this is beyond insult." Gennari laughed nervously, trying to pretend she wasn't shaken. "Or maybe he's gone mad. He's old. He's ruled to Plong. Maybe he finally snapped." Tula didn't say anything. She just looked at Rayan, as if trying to see through his face into something deeper. Rayan sat quietly on a bench, still processing what had just happened. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a diplomat. He was just a survivor. And now, somehow, he was about to become husband to 3 royal aliens. A servant entered without a sound and handed Tula a sealed message. She opened it, her fingers trembling slightly. She read the short note and spoke aloud. "The king says the wedding rituals begin at dawn. Refusal by any party is considered treason." Treason. Rayan looked up at that word. It meant death. On this planet he didn't even know the name of the city he was in, and now his life was tied to 3 alien women. He'd just met. Savara paced the floor like a caged predator. She couldn't believe it. Their father had always been strict but fair. This felt like madness. She stared at Rayan again, this time with real hatred. "What is it about you?" she snapped. "What magic have you used? We're of royal blood, and he treats you like a chosen one." Gennari leaned against a crystal pillar. "Maybe he's trying to punish us. We've always rejected the throne. Maybe this is his revenge." Rayan finally stood. His voice was calm. "I don't want to be part of this," he said. "You think I came here to take power? I barely made it out of my wrecked ship." Aliv stepped forward, watching him carefully. "Then why are you still here? You could have escaped during the confusion. You didn't even try." Rayan looked away. "Because I heard what your people are saying. They speak of shadows coming from the stars of worlds, going silent. Something is happening out there, and I think your father believes I have a role to play in it." Savara scoffed. "So he'll use a human to stop the dark. What can you possibly do that we can't?" Rayan didn't answer, not because he didn't have a reply, but because even he didn't know yet. The next morning the entire palace was prepared for the ancient rite. No celebration, no joy, only cold tradition. The air was tense. 3 royal daughters and 1 human stood before the priests, surrounded by walls of silver flame. The rituals were symbolic gestures of unity, combining their life threads for survival. Rayan repeated the words they gave him, but his mind stayed elsewhere. Why him? Why now? What was the king really planning when it was over? No one clapped, no one smiled. It was done. Rayan was now bound by law to 3 women who didn't want him, and he didn't want them either. Not like this, not under these rules. That night the king summoned him alone to his private chamber. The old ruler sat by a massive window, staring out at a purple moon. He gestured for Rayan to sit beside him. "You feel trapped," the king said. Rayan nodded. "Yes, good, because only trapped men seek freedom." The king turned to him slowly. "Long ago the humans were more than just warriors. They were defenders of life. Your ancestors fought the Void Titans. They sacrificed entire planets to save the rest of the galaxy. But after the fall of your kind, the darkness started creeping back, and now it is almost her." Listened carefully, his chest tight. "I've read some of those old legends," he said. "They say the Void Titans were unstoppable, that nothing but human blood could resist their pull, and that's why I chose you," the king said. "Not for your strength, but because your weakness is your power. You feel pain, you have empathy, and you carry the memory of a dying race that once gave everything to protect." Rayan was quiet. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man who survived. That is all a hero ever is," the king replied. He stood up, walking slowly to a sealed vault at the far end of the room. He pressed his palm to the wall, and it opened with a low hum. Inside was a small glowing orb, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "This is the Ember Core," the king said, "the last piece of the ancient weapon known as the Heart Flare. It can only awaken in the presence of bonded royal blood and a living human soul, yours, and now you are bonded to my daughter." Rayan's mouth went dry. "So the marriages were the key," the king said. "You are not their toy human, you are their shield." Before Rayan could reply, the wall behind them shook. Alarms screamed through the palace. "The enemy has arrived," and Rayan was no longer just a visitor. He was the last ember in a dying fire, the alien trials. The sky above the capital turned red as emergency lights washed the entire palace in warning colors. Soldiers rushed through the marble halls, royal guards formed walls at every entrance. Alien nobles whispered in fear, but the king stood still, watching the sky through the high tower as black shapes moved like shadows with purpose. They were not attacking, not yet. They were waiting. Tangrian was taken to the inner sanctum, escorted by armored guards, and followed by the three royal sisters. He walked ahead of them, feeling the weight of every step. They did not speak to him, not out of hatred this time. It was something else. Silence born from the same tension that pulled tight across every corridor inside the sanctum. A group of elder priests waited, wearing robes woven with light. The chamber was ancient, round, and carved from volcanic crystal. In the center was the trial stone, a platform linked directly to the mental and emotional core of whoever stood on it. The elder priest raised his hand. As is written in the Codex of Flame, the union must be tested. 3 trials, 3 truths. Only then will the bond be complete. Only then can the ember core awaken. Awaken. Ryan stepped forward. He didn't ask what the trials were. He knew by now that nothing would be explained. Siva was the first, as eldest. Her trial came first. She looked at him, her face a cold wall of defiance. Her test was the trial of strength. Warrior arena formed around them, projected by psychic energy. Rayan stood alone, as massive alien constructs rose from the ground. Steel beasts with glowing eyes charged at him. Severa stood above, watching, waiting. He had no weapons, no armor, only his instincts and his training. From a time long past, he moved fast, used the terrain, outsmarted the machines where they relied on brute force. He used timing, angles, and pressure. When it was over, his chest was bleeding, his arms shaking, but he stood while the constructs lay shattered. Siva looked down at him for the first time. Her eyes held no hatred, only surprise. You were not supposed to win that. Rayan didn't answer. He didn't need. Toyanari stepped forward next. Her trial was the trial of wit. A shifting maze of illusions and lies. Rayan had to find the exit, but every turn showed him things that pulled at his mind, visions of Earth, his family, people he had lost. He kept walking, ignoring the traps. His heart screamed, but his feet never stopped. After what felt like hours, he walked out of the maze, his eyes hollow but focused. Yanari met his gaze. You chose pain over comfort. That was the right answer, she said. Quietly. Tula was last, the trial of heart. They stood in a chamber with no threats, no illusions, only silence, and the truth. You think this is a game, she said finally, but it is not. If we fail, everything ends. We are not just sisters, we are the last line of an empire falling. Apertrayan looked at her. I never wanted to be part of this, but I also never ran from something that needed saving. She stepped closer. Then prove it. Let me inside your memories. The trial of heart required a sharing, a mental merge. Only those who had nothing to hide could survive. Trayan noted. They placed hands on the memory crystal, and suddenly Tula was in his mind. She saw everything. The burning of Mars Station, the plague ships over Europa, his final goodbye to the only brother he had. His pain was real, his loyalty unshaken. She pulled back, tears in her eyes. You carry more sorrow than most of our soldiers, and still you walk forward. The elder priests spoke again. The trials are complete. The bond is proven. At that moment, the ember core in the vault pulsed, faint but undeniable, a reaction. The prophecy was real, but celebration did not come. A loud blast shook the palace. An explosion tore through the outer gates. Rayan turned as armored guards rushed in, yelling. Attackers inside. The enemy breached. Arlina Savara grabbed a weapon from the wall. Yanari summoned a force field. Tula raised the alert through her communicator, but none of them were prepared for what came next. A masked figure appeared out of thin air, using forbidden phase technology. They moved fast straight toward Rayanthi. Assassin's blade struck, but not deep enough. Rayant twisted, caught the attacker's wrist, and slammed him to the ground. Blood spread, not his. The attacker vanished with a flicker of light, leaving only a single message burned into the floor. Give us the human or lose. The stars, the sister, surrounded him, now not as mockers, but as protectors. Someone wants you dead, Tula said, not because of who you are, but because of what you might become. Marian held his side, blood soaking through. The world spun slightly, but he nodded. Then, I better become something worth fearing. The war had begun, and the trials were only the beginning. The enemy within the palace had not seen such chaos in over a century. Sirens howled across the domes as energy barriers flickered on and off. Medical drones swarmed the corridors while soldiers ran in organized panic, but deep within the healing chambers of the inner wing, Rayon lay on a crystal slab, breathing slowly, his side bandaged and pulsing with a dull ache. The assassin's blade had missed his heart by inches, but it had done more than wound his body. It had opened a new understanding. Someone powerful wanted him gone, not just eliminated but erased completely. The sisters had not left his side since the attack. Sivara paced the room like a caged beast, speaking to military officers through her wrist device, barking orders and threats. Jina sat quietly, her usual smirk absent, lost in calculations and coded signals, trying to trace the energy signature of the assassin. Tula sat closest, her hand on Rayon's, as if grounding him in reality. "You should be unconscious," she whispered. "You lost a lot of blood." Rain's voice was soft. "I have things to do. Sleep can wait." Savara turned toward him, her eyes sharper than usual. "That assassin came from inside our walls. No outsider could phase through our defense systems without help, which means one thing we have a traitor." Yanri's voice was calm but cold. "Maybe more than one. This planet has been too quiet for too long, and someone inside the court wants the prophecy to fall." The door hissed open as the king entered, slower than before, his face pale. He looked at his daughters, then at Rayon. "We have identified the mark left by the attacker. It belongs to the Silent Hand, a group that should not exist anymore." Rayon sat up, ignoring the sting. "I've heard of them. They're not just assassins. They were used by ancient empires to erase bloodlines." The king nodded. "They were destroyed long ago, or so we believed. Now they move again, and their target is you." Savara clenched her fists. "Then we cut off the hand before it strikes again." The king shook his head. "It is not that simple. The traitor is close, and we must draw them out." Yenri stood. "We let the enemy think the human is weakened, that their attempt succeeded halfway. They will try again, and this time we will be ready." "Is risky," Tula said, "but necessary." And looked at all three of them. Something had changed. Where once there was scorn, now stood unity, not perfect, not warm, but real. The pressure of war had begun to forge something new. The plan was set in motion. Rayon would be moved to a secondary palace, but secretly he would be placed inside the vault of the Ember core. The energy of the core would mask his presence from scans and tracking systems. Meanwhile, the sisters would host a false mourning event in the central court, claiming Rayon's condition was critical. As the fake ceremony began, nobles filled the room, some masking grief, others hiding pleasure. Old alliances shifted behind folded hands and tight smiles. The sisters wore ceremonial black and spoke in cryptic phrases as expected, but their minds were elsewhere inside the vault. Rayon watched through a hidden monitor. His fingers touched the outer casing of the Ember core. The sphere pulsed under his touch, reacting slightly, as if sensing his mind. His thoughts drifted to Earth, to the battles, to the faces he had lost. He did not want to be a symbol, he did not want to be a weapon, but maybe wanting had nothing to do with it anymore. Sudden spark broke his thoughts. The lights flickered, a pulse ran through the vault. Something was wrong. He stood slowly, hand reaching for the emergency beacon. Before he could touch it, the room exploded in light and sound. A squad of masked attackers phased into the vault, each dressed in silent black. No words, no threats, just blades and death. Ducked the first strike, grabbing a piece of metal from the wall. He fought hard, not with alien strength but with desperate human instinct. One by one he brought them down, bleeding again but alive. Then he heard her scream. The sisters had been ambushed outside. The sisters had been ambushed mid-ceremony. An explosion tore the court chamber. Sivara and Yanari had formed shields around the guests, but Tula had been dragged into a transport by cloaked figures. When the smoke cleared, only blood and silence remained. Ryan emerged from the vault, his body shaking, eyes burning. He found Sivara and Yanari standing together, their armor stained with soot. They turned toward him. "She's gone," Yanari said. "They took her into the Waste Shrine." Didn't wait. He moved past the guards, ignored the healers. He looked at the king, who stood at the edge of the ruined court, his eyes hollow. "Give me a ship," Rayon said. "I'm bringing her Bafta." King did not argue. He only nodded once as Rayon stepped into the dark of space aboard a stealth vessel. The Ember core, inside the palace, pulsed again, brighter this time, almost alive. The human, the sisters, the bond. The war, it had truly begun. Hearts begin to change. The wastes stretched for hundreds of miles across the broken surface of Zurich's prime. They were cursed lands, dry, cracked and filled with the bones of fallen cities that vanished long before any living soul could remember. No laws reached here, no royal power, only death and silence. Eula woke with her wrists bound and her head throbbing. Her last memory was the explosion, then arms grabbing her and shadows pulling her into the dark. Now she sat inside a cold metal cell, deep within what looked like a collapsed facility, half buried under ash and stone. The air smelled of rust and electricity. She could hear distant voices speaking in harsh, low tones. They were not rebels, they were something older. A door opened with a heavy creak, and in stepped a tall figure cloaked in shadow. His mask was silver, shaped like a beast, and his voice was smooth, like poison. "Welcome, princess," he said. "You are not here as a prisoner, you are a key. And keys must be protected until the gate is ready." Tula didn't speak. She watched him closely, reading the weight of his stance, the cold rhythm of his breath. He was not afraid of her, which meant he had no idea who she truly was. Meanwhile, high above the wastes, Rayan's stealth ship hovered low, scanning every structure. Yenari sat beside him, eyes on the scanner, trying to track Tula's signature. Severa stood behind them, arms crossed, silent since they left the palace. Neither sister had said much since the abduction. Now they moved with purpose, not emotion. But Rayan could feel the pressure in the air between them. "We should have protected her," Janari said without turning. Severa replied coldly. "We will." The signal flickered, then locked, a life signature faint and buried beneath the eastern ridge. Rayan took the controls and dropped the ship low between the jagged stones. As they landed, Rayan reached for a weapon but paused as Severa handed him something. It was a blade forged from her own armor, custom fit and humming with energy. She looked at him without a word, and he nodded for the first time. There was respect in that exchange, not agreement, but respect. The underground base was silent as they entered. Too silent. They moved through the ruins, with weapons raised. Suddenly, a shriek cut through the hallway, and figures emerged from the shadows. Not soldiers, not assassins, but creatures with broken armor and glowing veins. Failed experiments twisted by ancient Tekrayon fought at the front, his blade moving with sharp precision. Severa covered the side, shielding him from flankers. Yenari hacked the controlled doors, rerouting the power grid, and locking paths behind them. Deeper they went, past rusted halls and flickering lights, until they reached a containment chamber with shattered glass walls and tubes filled with thick liquid, and inside, Tulashe was suspended in a glowing field, eyes closed but alive. Rayan stepped forward, ignoring the warnings from the console. He placed his hand on the chamber and spoke softly to Tula. "Wake up." Where here her eyes fluttered, then snapped open. The energy field collapsed, and she fell forward into his arms. For a moment there was silence, then she looked up at him, her eyes wet with disbelief. "He came for me," she whispered. "Always," he replied. Severa and Yenari moved fast, securing the path out. But just as they reached the main corridor, the masked figure returned. He moved like lightning blades spinning from his arms, his voice a whisper of anger. "You should not have come. The prophecy will not be fulfilled. He is not one of us." Ryan stood between him and the sisters. "Maybe I'm not," he said, "but I'm not leaving without her." The fight was brutal. The masked enemy struck with inhuman speed, but this time Rayan was not alone. Severa attacked from the right, using her strength to force the enemy back. Yenari flanked him from the shadows, disabling his tech with targeted blasts. Tula struck last, unleashing a pulse from her bond link that shattered the enemy's mask. He screamed and vanished into the shadows, but the message was clear: they would come again. Back on the ship, Tula sat beside Rayan, wrapped in a thermal cloak, her head resting against his shoulder. She had stopped trembling, but her voice was still soft. "I thought I was just a symbol in this game, but now I know you make us more than just bloodlines and titles." Rayan looked at her. "You're not a symbol. You're someone who matters, not because of who your father is, but because of who you choose to be." She smiled for the first time, not as a princess but as someone real. Approached from the control panel, her expression unreadable. "We owe you a debt," she said. "I do not say that," Lightlinary added. "And we are not done yet." The ship turned back toward the capital behind them. The wastes burned quietly ahead. The stars waited, and inside the Ember Core, a new fire had begun to glow. The battle for the throne and galaxy. The stars above Zuraxis were no longer quiet. Ships moved like dark insects across the sky, huge and silent, each one glowing with the strange light of forbidden energy. They came not to conquer but to erase. No demands, no warnings, only their presence, and the knowledge that soon everything below would be ashes. The palace. Rayan stood before the king, his jaw tight, his shoulders bruised from battle, his mind sharper than ever. Behind him the three sisters weighted their armor, polished their weapons, humming, their expressions hard. "They are not a fleet," Rayan said quietly. "They are a storm. And they have waited long enough." The king nodded slowly. "It is time." In the center of the palace, where the walls formed a perfect circle, stood the heart of their world. The Ember Core pulsed like a living heart, brighter now than ever before. Priests stood around it, chanting words older than any empire. This was not war by machines or numbers. This was prophecy awakening, through choice, through bond, through will. You must complete the merge, the head priest said, human and royal blood, woven together. Only then will the heart flare awaken. The sisters stepped forward. Severa extended her palm without hesitation. Yenar followed, her eyes locked on Rayon. Tula came last, her expression calm, but her hand trembling. Gryan pressed his hand into the core with theirs, and the chamber exploded with light. He felt their memories, their fears, their hopes, crashing into his mind like waves. He saw Severa on the training grounds, a child desperate for her father's approval. He saw Yanari alone in dark rooms, pretending not to care. He saw Tula drawing stars with her fingers, dreaming of peace in a world built on war. And in return, they saw earth, they saw fire and snow. They saw a boy losing his home and choosing to become something stronger. The light faded, the heart flare had awakened from beneath. The palace, the ancient vaults trembled. A platform rose, carrying a weapon unlike anything built in this age. Not a gun, not a blade, but a living engine, forged by the first alliance of human and alien mind. The enemy fleet moved. Rayon turned to the sisters. Let's end this. They rose together into the sky, inside the heart flare vessel, guided by thought, powered by bond. As they emerged into space, the stars blinked and the enemy opened fire, but the heart flare did not break. Severa led the assault, her mind calculating enemy trajectories. Yanari rerouted energy blasts back to their source, using predictive logic. Tula connected with the enemy tech, disrupting their formations, and Rayon guided them all with instinct and memory. He moved like someone who had seen the end of worlds and refused to see it again. One by one, the enemy ships fell, not through brute force, but through perfect understanding of weakness. But the enemy had not revealed everything. A final vessel emerged from a hidden fold in space, larger than anything seen before. It was a carrier of void energy, a weapon of extinction. Inside, the heart flare systems began to fail. Rayon felt the pressure building in his chest. They could not hold much longer. He looked at the sisters. You have to break the link. I will finish it. Alantula shook her head. We are not losing you again. Severa grabbed his shoulder. We stand together or we fall. Yanari's voice was soft but clear. No more sacrifices without choice. The heart flare core overloaded with energy. As the four of them pushed past limits, they directed the remaining power into a singular pulse, a memory wave. It struck the enemy carrier, not with destruction but with overwhelming emotion. Memories of Earth, of loss of hope, of humanity. The alien systems fractured, the void core cracked, and the ship vanished into the fold from which it came. The stars went silent. Again back in the palace, the people gathered across balconies and courtyards. They had seen the sky light up. They had seen the impossible. When the heart flare returned, there was no cheering, only awe. The king stood waiting, his body weaker, now old age claiming what battle could know. Looked at Rayon and smiled faintly. You gave us a chance. Not just to survive, but to change. He stepped forward and placed the crown at Rayon's feet. From this day forward, you will not be a symbol, you will be a choice. Our future begins with you. But Rayon did not take the crown. He lifted it and placed it in the center of the circle between the sisters. Let the people choose. Let the old ways end. The sisters stood beside him, not behind him, not above him, beside together. The ember core pulsed once more, not as a weapon but as a heartbeat. The human king, the sun, over Zurich's primrose in silence. Its golden light stretched across the palace walls, touching the banners of victory still swaying in the cool morning wind. People filled the central court from every corner of the empire, not to witness a coronation, not to obey a command, but to decide for the first time in generations who they would follow and wherein. Stood at the edge of the royal platform, wearing nothing but a simple cloak, the fabric still torn from the last battle. He had no crown on his head, no medals pinned to his chest. He was not royalty by birth nor chosen by blood, but he was the man who stood when others fell, and that was something no law could ignore. Beside him stood Severa, armored in ceremonial silver, her hands behind her back, her gaze sharp. She had once believed strength came from fear, but now she understood that the strongest leaders were those who listened, not commanded. Yanari stood next to her, her eyes softer now, no longer hiding behind sarcasm. She had always seen weakness in empathy, but now saw power in connection, and through Rayon she had remembered how it felt to trust. Tula stood closest to Rayon, her presence quiet but full of certainty. She no longer dreamed of distant stars, because now she stood beside someone who could build bridges to them. The crowd waited, holding their breath, and Rayon spoke, not like a ruler but like a man with nothing left to lose and everything to give. He did not come here to lead, I came here to survive. But survival means nothing if we forget who we are. He looked out across the silent faces, some alien, some half-blood, some human refugees who had drifted across the galaxy searching for a place to belong. Your world saved me now, I asked. Will you let me help save it in return? No one shouted, no one shouted, no one cheered, but across the court people began to kneel, not in submission, but in agreement. For the first time since the rise of the Empire, the people had chosen, not out of fear but out of Belafrian, did not raise his hand. He simply turned and walked toward the ember circle. In the center he placed his hand on the glowing core. It pulsed in response, accepting him not as a master but as a partner. That day, the Empire changed, no longer ruled by blood but guided by Bantha. Sisters became his council, not wives in chains but equals by oath. Together they reformed the galaxy's oldest laws. Together they reached broken planets and offered healing instead of orders. Together they welcomed the forgotten and lifted the voices of the Sivara, led the new planetary guard, her sword now used for defense, not domination. She trained the next generation not in conquest but in honor. Inari built networks of truth, transforming spy webs into bridges of diplomacy. She became the voice of reason in every Holtula, led education and healing. She brought music back to ruined worlds. She built gardens over graves, and she never let Rayan forget to smile. Even when the days grew, Heverian visited Earth's ruins once. He stood on the cracked soil of what was once home. The sky was quiet, there no stars visible, but he did not feel alone because now he carried Earth in his decisions, in his new family, in his fight for a better future. He was not their king by crown, but by choice. He was not perfect, but he was human, and that was enough. The galaxy did not suddenly become kind. There were still shadows in deep space, still powers waiting to rise, still battles to fight, but as long as Rayan stood, and the sisters stood beside him, there would be light, there would be fire, there would be hope. The end.